So Orks finally get a decent sniper weapon, and it stands to reason that the ones that can deploy it are the sneakiest gits in the galaxy, the Blood Axes. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're continuing in our look at the new Ork rules. Warzone Octarius Critical Mass went up for pre-order this weekend, and along with the speed mob that we talked about yesterday, the Blood Axes also got themselves a Codex supplement, and as usual it's a few expanded fluffy rules for the army, including a few warlord traits, relics and stratagems. I would say that for the most part the rules mainly just seem like really fun and thematic ones, as opposed to things that are going to be massively meta-breaking or tournament shattering. But I think one of the most fun things is they get a relic sniper shooter, something that I was a little bit disappointed that this guy from the Ork Commandos box didn't actually get in the main codex. The shooter's a relic choice for an HQ unit. I just can't help but like the idea of someone using this part from the Commandos kit on some sort of Ork HQ, either a war boss or a big mech, and making an Orky equivalent of a Vindicare assassin. I just know for definite that someone out there is going to do that. In any case, let's take a look through the rules. We'll start with the warlord traits and relics, and then go on to the new Blood Axe stratagems. So first up, the Blood Axes have 3 new warlord traits to pick from: Extra Cunning, Counter Tactics, and Duck and Cover. Extra Cunning I'd say is really quite an interesting one. It could be worth a lot of command points, as each battle round, each time you use the strategic ploy stratagem, one of them will cost 1 less CP. Of course that's only a subset of stratagems within Codex Orks. Unstoppable Momentum and Tide of Muscle could be situationally useful. It could make drop shields actually worth considering at only 1 command point rather than 2, or maybe if you're bringing some of the beast snaggers along, then monster hunters for 2 CP could well be worth it. +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles could certainly be very nice. In any case, any warlord trait that could potentially be worth up to 5 CP really could well be worth it to have it on the table if you can keep the character alive. Next up, Counter Tactics is also really quite an interesting one. It's an aura of 6-inch heroic intervention for Blood Axe core units nearby. As its core units, this might be most relevant on things like boys, commandos, storm boys, or warbikers perhaps. But if you are piling a bunch of toughness 5 bodies onto midfield objectives, this is going to be a nice one to have to allow them to be a bit more threatening. It means that if your opponent don't want to get hit by a whole bunch of greenskin violence, they need to step back. Finally, we've got Duck and Cover, a trait that applies when a war boss and a unit of boys or commandos are entirely within an area terrain piece. That unit of boys or commandos will be untargetable unless the enemy unit is less than 12 inches away from that area terrain. Anything that can make units untargetable really is quite nice. I think the main issue for me with this one is that it's just a touch situational. Often you're not just going to be able to loiter within area terrain, say if you need to be strung out to get to an objective or something, or if you're just going to be rushing the enemy with chopper and slugger in hand, you're going to need to leave it behind. Certainly gives a nice extra synergy with commandos being in terrain which they do want to be, but for me that one doesn't seem quite as useful as the first 2. Overall, I think they're all kind of interesting. I'm not really sure if they outweigh Brutal but Cunning from the main codex just for the massive fight buff, or the Blood Axe one to allow a bit of redeployment shenanigans and putting things into strategic reserve cheaply. Next up we come to the Blood Axe relics, and here we have the Sniper. The Straight Shooter is a relic custom shooter, and it's 24-inch range, a big DACA 14/10, and strength 5, AP-1, damage 1, ignores Lookout Sir, and as with a fair few sniper weapons, if you roll a wound roll of 6, it causes a mortal wound as well. Now I really quite like this one of the few options that Orks have for directly targeting characters in the Codex, and the other ones are maybe a bit underwhelming, a couple of close range witchfires, and that opportunist warlord trait where you have to be very close. I think perhaps the best place for this might be a big mech in mega armor, where you can also have this and the teleport blaster for a bit of direct damage, as of course the mechs hit on a 4+, meaning that you'll get more damage out of this thing. If you are at 24-inch range, then you really do have a fairly decent damage output against characters. On average, this is spitting out around about 2 to 3 wounds against a Space Marine captain, and a fair bit better against things with low armor saves. You also certainly do have the potential to roll really hot with this. You're throwing so many dice that if you do happen to just roll a clutch of 6s, you could really swing up and spike a character dead in 1 turn. I guess perhaps the main issue with this is that it's competing against the dead shiny shooter, the one with damage 2. So you're basically trading out more direct damage for the ability to shoot characters. Still though, I think this one's really quite good fun, and certainly fits in well with the Blood Axe narrative. Next up we come to the Fight Detector, the one that was previewed by Warhammer Community, and for this one I don't really think it's all that powerful, but it really is quite good fun. It basically represents a Blood Axe looting a discarded Imperial Auspex, and then enjoying the way that it lights up when enemies get nearby to direct the lads to get the jump on them, rather than the other way round. Basically it only triggers when enemy reserves come in within 12 inches of the bearer, but then if there's a Blood Axe core unit nearby, that Blood Axe core unit immediately gets to charge the incoming reserves, and furthermore gets a +2 to charge as well. Of course, if this rule ever does actually trigger, then it's absolutely massive. Your Blood Axe unit should be able to strike before the enemy unit in the ensuing fight phase, and if the enemy unit was planning on shooting you at all, then most of the time they're not going to be able to, as they're now locked up in combat. The main issue is that I don't think that this rule will virtually ever get triggered. Your opponent can just opt to bring reserves in somewhere else on the table if it's actually going to matter, and he might not be covering that much of the table in the first place, as the aura is only from one character, and that character usually isn't going to want to be right on the front lines for fear of getting shot. So really quite cool in principle. I guess it's quite nice for a bit of area denial, I suppose, but it's a little disappointing to see cool rules that will rarely take effect. Finally, last but not least, we have the noise box. This one's a little leadership debuff relic, a 6-inch aura of -1 leadership and -1 combat attrition that goes up to a big -3 leadership if your character happens to have killed an enemy character that game. Again, this one's got some fun fluff behind it. This orc happens to have looted an Imperial Vox set and is having a great time bellowing orders and war cries into the apparatus to emerge from the speaker. Leadership debuffs do tend to be a bit hit and miss in 9th. A lot of armies really don't care about them at all, whether they're big vehicles or just incredibly elite troops in the first place. But against the right foe, I guess that this could actually have a decent effect. Maybe cause another morale casualty or two if you're lucky. Still though, not really sure it competes that well with a cool sniper shooter, or just the standard very good orc relics, things like the Killer Claw if you want a bit of direct damage for example. Overall, I think I put the vast majority of these choices as more fun and fluffy than ultra competitive. I'd say extra cunning and counter tactics might be kind of interesting on the Warlord trait side, and the straight shooter is a genuinely interesting option out of the relics. Finally, the Blood Axes get a page of stratagems, and being Blood Axes, most of these are quite fun ones of revolving sneaky tricks around things like commandos and storm boys. First up, starting at 1 CP, we have Youngbloods. This is +1 strength for storm boys in melee, going up to 2 CP if you have greater than 10 models in the squad. A nice direct damage buff really isn't too hard to argue with. If the strength 4 to strength 5 is going to make a difference, then this one could be a very easy one to use. It's basically a 50% damage increase on your choppers if you're striking at toughness 5 targets for example. Quite cool, particularly as storm boys are quite a strong unit at the moment, pretty good for objectives and actions, as well as maybe bullying some light infantry. Next up for 2 CP we've got Gotham Trapped. This one applies to an enemy unit within engagement range of 2 Blood Axe units, and it gives you exploding 6s in melee on any attacks that target that unit, so a roll of 6 to hit scores 1 additional hit against the enemy. For me, I'm a little bit less overwhelmed by that one. Usually if you're hitting on 3s, that's going to be a 25% increase in damage output. Sure, you do get it on 2 units, but it is pretty expensive as well at 2 CP. Maybe one to use when you think that the additional damage might genuinely have an impact on how hard the enemy hits you back. Next up for 1 or 2 CP we have Trigger Discipline. This one makes Blood Axe looters far more efficient against enemy vehicles, with a very nice damage increase of re-rolling hit rolls against them. As it goes, I don't really think that looters are the go-to Orky firepower right now, but this certainly makes them a lot more interesting in the Blood Axe army, and it really will make them far more efficient against clearing out light vehicle targets. For example, if you manage to get 10 looters within dagger range of a standard toughness 7 vehicle, you'd usually do around about 5 wounds, and with this stratagem you'd do around about 8 or 9. So perhaps in one of the better case scenarios that could easily add up to 3 or 4 extra wounds for 1 CP. Could be well worth it, though it does mean that you actually have to bring some looters along. Next up, and perhaps my favourite out of these stratagems, is 1 command point for Surprise, and that's Surprise spelt with a Z and an exclamation mark because of course we're Orks. This one applies to commandos that are entirely within area terrain. With their special rules they're already going to be pretty hard against enemy shooting. If they get light cover then that's a 3+ armor save, and this now makes them incredibly hard to charge as well. If the enemy charges such a unit, they don't get to fight first, they don't count as having charged, and they also get -1 to hit the commandos as well. That could make a big blob of commandos a really intimidating prospect to clear in the midfield. Your shooting isn't going to be particularly effective against them, and if you charge then you're going to get hit first. I'd say for 1 command point that's going to be one of the best deals of the whole bunch, though of course with every model having to be within the area terrain, it is still situational. I do think it's quite nice first turn insurance for commandos though. If you do set up somewhere midfield and area terrain, then the opponent gets first turn. Next up for 1 CP we have Glory Boys. Another Storm Boys won this, and basically Storm Boys units get +2 to charge against 1 enemy unit that you've already charged with a Blood Axe model this turn. That could definitely make a long charge a lot more reliable, and I feel that this could be quite interesting for a deep strike assault as well, though of course you do need a bit of coordination about it. If you can drop your storm boys 9 inches away from a target that you're already going to charge with something else, that effectively gives you a 7-inch charge that you can automatically re-roll with Here We Go, and that's a really good chance to get your deep strike unit stuck straight into the foe, potentially with a +1 to strength as well if you also spring for the Youngblood stratagem. Definitely needs a bit of coordination, but that might be one of the better ways of making deep strike storm boys work as actual damage dealers. Next up, for 1 CP, we have Stratagems. One unit 12 inches from one of your commando units loses their cover against shooting. Again, I'd say that's kind of situational but useful. Kind of depends on how much Orky shooting that you have brought along, but if you do have a decent Orky gun line, then that could actually be really handy in some cases. Say for example, if you have an enemy unit in dense cover, -1 to hit can be really bad for Orks as they only hit on 5s anyway. It literally cuts their damage output in half, and if you can have a whole bunch of your army hitting on 5s when they otherwise would have hit on 6s, that's going to be a really good thing for 1 CP. I guess not too bad to get around light cover as well, if there's going to be a bunch of enemies where the saves are going to be really high. I think this one could have really good value, though it does depend on how many guns you're focusing down into one unit. Next for 2 CP we have Tactical Awareness. This one's one for helping your units do actions. It allows a unit to do an action even if they've advanced, or they can also shoot while doing an action, or use any aura abilities they have while also doing an action. Both advancing and actioning and shooting and actioning can really be handy. Sometimes that might genuinely be the difference as to whether you score a bunch of victory points or you miss out on some perhaps pivotal damage. At 2 CP though, it is a bit of a pricey one. I certainly want to be avoiding using this if possible, but I think in some cases it could be one of the most reliable ways to get things like Retrieve Octarius data done. Say for example, if you do this with a Storm Boys unit, they can move 18 inches with their advance, and potentially jump well into the enemy's table quarter to complete the action in your turn. I think this definitely will see some play, but every time you use it, it is going to cost you other options with that 2 CP. Finally, last but not least, we have Special Ammunition. This one costs 1 or 2 command points again, depending on whether you have more than 10 models in the squad or not, and this one appears to be some Orc shooter boys taking a leaf out of the Death Watch's book. It makes shooters become DACA 4-2 weapons and AP -1 as well. I think this one's going to be most useful when you're actually within DACA range of the enemy, though I think the damage output is maybe a little bit passable for the CP put in. Say against Guardsmen, a unit of 10 shooter boys within DACA range are going to kill around about 4 or 5 of them, going up to around about 7 or 8 if you use this stratagem. On a unit of 10 shooter boys, it averages an extra say 3 dead guardsmen or around 2 extra wounds to a space marine, which I think is kind of passable for the command point invested. That's in best case scenario as well, presuming that you've got 10 shooter boys all within DACA range. Overall though, there are really quite a lot of fun and thematic ones here for the Blood Axes. I think out of this page my favourite is probably the surprise one for the Commandos, though Youngbloods and Glory Boys are interesting for the Storm Boys, particularly out of Deep Strike, and Stratagems and Tactical Awareness will be situationally useful as well. So that just about brings us to the end of our mini Blood Axe Codex review. Overall, I describe these rules as more sort of fun and fluffy as opposed to meta-breakingly strong, which I think is quite a nice place for these supplements to be released in really. A few fun extra rules for the people who do pick them up, but not necessarily a mandatory purchase if you want to play Blood Axes. In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have I missed or underestimated anything? I look forward to any feedback from cunning Orc commanders out there. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly try and keep a few more Orky videos coming from time to time. I might do a quick one on the looted wagon rules sometime later in the week. They could well be fun to have a look at. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and you'd like to help support, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. A massive thank you to you guys who are helping support. It is what allows me to keep the videos coming quite so regularly. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.